and welcome to Analog Insights. In today's episode, I take a closer look at the Canon L2, a wonderful and rather rare Canon rangefinder with an M39 mount from 1956. I first stumbled upon this camera when reading and researching for our Canon VT Deluxe and Canon P reviews that I did together with my friend Simon, and where I was reading the Canon Rangefinders book by Peter Dechert. And he's mentioning the Canon L2 as an interesting alternative to the Canon VT Deluxe that comes with for the very first time for Canon, a thumb lever advance, so at the top instead of the bottom, which the VT Deluxe had. And he also mentions that there were only 7,350 units produced and that very few of them are available outside of Japan. So my interest got piqued here, and when I was planning my very first trip to Tokyo at the end of last year, I sat down and thought of potential buys that I could purchase on site in Tokyo. And I ended up putting the Canon L2 on my list and got really lucky because I actually found one in solid condition that was actually on sale for 8,800 yen, which roughly translates to 60 euro. So just the body only. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity despite the fact that it wasn't in fantastic condition, but just a solid one. So I got this camera on site thinking, okay, it's a Canon rangefinder from the 1950s. The build quality is great. It supports the kinds of focal length that I like, which is 50mm and 35mm. It has an LTM or M39 mount, so it's perfect for somebody like me wanting to shoot either vintage LTM lenses or modern ones, either by a Voigtländer, Leica, of course, but also TD Artisan and other manufacturers moving in that direction. Light Lens Labs would be another one. So, of course, I jumped at this opportunity seeing this camera. And I also knew, okay, it's an interesting transition point in the history of Canon because of that first with the thumb lever advance. And it should be mentioned that the sister cameras, the Canon L1 and the Canon L3, are also interesting. So if you're wondering why this one, it was just the first in that line. Interestingly, despite the two in the name, this one came first. It was produced briefly between November and December 1956, and then between May all the way through December 1957, and in limited quantities, as I've mentioned. The sister cameras came slightly later, and the main difference here is that this one here, the L2, has a maximum shutter speed of 1/500th of a second, while the L1 features a shutter of 1/1000th of a second as a maximum shutter speed. And the L3 is an even more reduced version. We also have to bear in mind, looking at the 1950s, that this was the prime time of rangefinder cameras. So this was a direct competitor at the time to the legendary Leica M3, and then later, of course, to the Leica M2, which was a reduced version of that one. So it's interesting to look at it from that perspective. You also have the Nikon S rangefinders a little later. And here was a lot of competition and, of course, also debate and discussions going on in which direction should the market move. So you had different approaches to the viewfinders. Do you want to have frame lines displayed like you would have on a Leica M3, or would you like to switch your viewfinder like here, fitting to the lenses between 50mm and 35, and in this case even the rangefinder mode? Or how do you want to advance your film? Should it be with a thumb lever on top, or should it be with this advance here, with the rapid advance using the entire hand, like on the VT Deluxe or the Leica VT models, the MP, the original one from Leica? So all these debates were going on, plus how to load your film. Do you want to remove the entire back like on a Nikon S rangefinder, or do you want to open it up like here on the L2, open up the back like you would later with an SLR, or do you only want to remove the bottom plate like on a Leica M and insert your film? And that, of course, for me as a collector of these vintage rangefinders, it's super interesting to explore and to have these different cameras in my collection. I shot the camera in the past couple of months, testing it extensively with a 50mm Tokyo Kogakure Topcore S. an f2 lens that is simply outstanding and fantastic and certainly not talked about enough, and I will dedicate an entire review on this. But if you wonder why are these images so beautiful and why is the quality so fantastic, it's because of this 50mm lens. It has nothing to do with the camera. It's just a great LTM lens that I can highly recommend. And in general, there were fantastic lenses in the 1950s. So this one here is period correct, and this was important to me, to have something that is equally special, a lens that is equally special to match to this special camera here. I took it out in winter in Munich after I arrived from Japan, and also recently to a trip to Agadir, so Morocco. In this particular case, I shot mostly color film because I wanted to capture these special colors. And of course, as always, these films were developed and scanned by my trusted on-film lab in Frankfurt. So let's take a closer look at this beautiful camera. So what makes the Canon L2 so special? It basically comes with all the benefits of the Canon VT, which is in itself a fantastic camera. So for instance, the viewfinder with a switch between 50, 35 and the rangefinder mode, or the open back film loading, which is very convenient. But the main difference here is that you don't have the bottom trigger to advance your film, but a thumb lever at the top. The camera also does without the self-timer feature on the front, which means it has a clean design on the front, which I personally really like, and it only comes with flash bulb support and a 1/500th of a second shutter speed that I've mentioned before as a maximum. The camera has still two shutter speed dials, so one on the top that you need to lift up to change, and one for the slower speeds here at the front. So you would typically, as always, set to the 1/30 one on the top, and then you're setting the details on the front one if you want to transition to the slower speeds. In regular use, you typically stick to the 1/60th of a second and 1/500th second range. What I personally like is that it's logarithmically up here in terms of the distances of the different shutter speeds. The shutter is made of cloth instead of metal, and it's thus a bit quieter, but also prone, of course, to getting holes burned into by the sun, so it always is recommendable to put your cap back on. The camera also introduced a magazine opening key on the bottom plate, which made it impossible to accidentally, or virtually impossible to accidentally open the bag, because you have to open that key first and then pull the little trigger here or lever to open the bag here as well. Since the camera only supports flash bulb synchronization, the little window here on the top, which usually retains the selector, is blacked out. So also pretty convenient from the Canon side to just black it out instead of updating the top plate. And the connector here is located on the side of the camera. The top plate also features a frame counter, which needs to be manually set in this particular case, but the way it is designed, typically if you take out your final roll after finishing it and putting in a new one, you would end up by advancing it again at the first frame more or less again. So you typically in regular use don't have to set it manually if you're shooting 36 frame standard rolls. If you would use 24 frame rolls, then of course you have to set it manually. And it's interesting because of course the Leica M2 as a stripped down reduced version of the M3 also came with a manual frame counter back then. In sum, you can say that this is a simplified but beautiful and clean Canon rangefinder that is great for shooting 35 and 50mm LTM lenses. And in my opinion, it is an ideal, lean and sleek alternative to the later Canon P or even the Canon 7. Of course, this camera here doesn't have a built-in light meter, so you either have to use the Sunny 16 rule or add one in the cold or hot shoe up here. What is also worth mentioning is that there is a special feature introduced in that cold shoe here that you can basically use it in combination with a special Canon viewfinders, accessory viewfinders, that use a little pin in here to tell the viewfinder the focusing distance that you have set. And as a result of that, it supports parallax compensation for these add-on viewfinders, which is quite advanced for the time and an interesting system here. So if you are into that and want to use it with a certain wider angle lenses and the attachable original viewfinders, you can do that here as well. As mentioned briefly, the Canon L1 is a slightly later camera and a bit more advanced because it also comes with 1/1000th of a second maximum shutter speed and a flash support for strobes and an improved film rewind lever that works for faster rewinding the film. And then there's also the Canon L3, which is an even more reduced version because it comes without any kind of flash support, so you also don't have that here on the side. But besides that, it's virtually the same camera, and all of them are mostly available on the Japanese market. Canon L2 comes with an M39 or Leica thread mount, and as a result of that, it gives you access to all sorts of fantastic vintage lenses. So you could hunt down an original Leica LMR or a period correct Canon or Nikon rangefinder lens from back then. Or if you prefer it a little bit more quirky, you could also go in the Soviet era Industar or Jupiter lens direction. At the same time, you can also tap into a wide variety of modern lenses from manufacturers like Voigtländer or TD Artisan occasionally produces for the LTM mount, or Light Lens Labs. And this, of course, is also fantastic, and we had one of those lenses, the 35mm Voigtländer Color Scopar, featured in the Canon P and Canon VT Deluxe reviews, one of Simon's lenses. And at least to me, this is very interesting, to use a modern lens with modern rendering and color reproduction on such a camera and produce modern looking results and still have that feeling of a 1950s camera. So very interesting from my perspective, and yet, as you can see, I settled on hunting down a lens that is equally special as the camera, and that is the Tokyo Kogaku 50mm f2 top core S lens. A beautiful lens that for me is the icing on the cake here because it kind of matches and complements that camera, and I get consistently good results. I get beautiful color reproduction, especially here in Agadir, and a lot of details, a lot of feeling. And what was important to me is here that I could actually create images in the same vein that somebody could have done in the 1950s or 60s using that camera and lens combination. So to me, this is important and feels very nice. And visually, of course, these lenses from back then also perfectly match that camera. And the same holds true to the legendary Canon Japanese Sumilux, for instance, the 50mm f1.4 lens that we also had reviewed here before. This would also perfectly fit a Canon L2, of course. There's one thing to note, and that is that collapsible lenses can be mounted but should never ever be collapsed on a Canon L2 because it might potentially damage the camera. So if I were you, I would just steer away from those and not go for one for the Canon L2. It can mount it, but you should never ever collapse them. So overall, great choices in terms of lenses, and I've briefly touched on before, there's also this special viewfinder from Canon that supports that little pin in here to get parallax compensation on these viewfinders. This would also be an interesting accessory for these cameras. So what about the handling and my personal impressions? What stands out the most, in my opinion, is the beautiful reduced design of this camera. It is just a classic rangefinder that does without all unnecessary features, so it really benefits from not having a self-timer on the front, in my opinion, from not having any kind of branding element. It is more of a quiet luxury camera that just has on the bottom plate a little bit of a branding engraving, and that's it. So really for those who know, and otherwise it's just very, very clean. And arguably the most interesting and beautiful version of this camera series here is the Canon L1 in black, but unfortunately this is a true collector piece. It's incredibly expensive, so if you ever stumble upon it, it might be a one-off opportunity to buy one. It is really heavily sought after by those in the know, similar to the black Nikon S rangefinders, but I would argue here even more because you really have to know your 1950s Canon rangefinders to be aware of that particular camera model. I have paired the camera here with a green Oberwärts reporter strap, which I really like, and kind of accentuates the monochrome look of this camera, or sometimes also a green inexpensive rope strap that I just got off eBay. So depending on your preferences, I personally like doing that, to have these kind of chrome cameras, chrome and black colored cameras, with a little bit of a touch of color in the strap, either a brown or light brown or taupe, or in this particular case the green. And especially here with the Oberwärts strap, it kind of fits the vibe, in my opinion, and accentuates the monochrome look of this camera. I would argue that the Canon L2 and also the L1 and L3 are fantastic alternatives to the significantly more expensive Leica M bodies that have become so expensive that it would be prohibitive to collect them in the same way as you can theoretically collect Canon rangefinders here, and kind of trace the history and the differences and the small nuances like Peter Dechert here does in his book. This is so interesting and a really rewarding experience. And even if you're just starting out and just want to have that one rangefinder, or give one rangefinder a try without breaking the bank, then the Canon L2 and these kinds of rangefinders are just fantastic, and I can highly recommend giving them a try. So from my perspective, this is the camera to go for, because it has that thumb lever advance. It comes with the kinds of focal length that I would want to shoot with it, the 50mm and the 35mm. There are some people in the internet arguing that you can use the rangefinder mode for also shooting, I think, 90 or 135mm lenses. And this, in my opinion, is not really a good option, because actually the rangefinder mode is meant to be used like that. So it gives you more of an oval view, and the focus is very much on that rangefinder spot. So I wouldn't do a proper composition with that one. Instead, you can simply use it in the 50mm or 35mm mode, and you're good to go. And also the focusing, it works perfectly fine in the regular viewfinder. You only need the rangefinder mode in tricky situations, in my opinion. In regular use, the code shoe here is populated with a light meter in my case, so it would be either the Dechert light meter, or here the relatively new Qi light and distance meter that I used in Agadir, and that worked perfectly fine. I get really nice exposure on my frames. So in regular use, it's just a very nice, sleek camera that is really for those in the know. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Analog Insights and my review of the Canon L2, a camera that is best found in Japan and that represents the transition period for Canon from moving away from producing these Leica copies that they originally did, the Leica thread mount, Oscar Barnack copies, to something with their own identity and especially this one here with the thumb advance lever is particularly interesting, and it represents an era where Canon was trying to compete with the Leica M3. And from today's perspective, it's a very interesting alternative, in my opinion, to the significantly more expensive other rangefinder cameras. And if you just want to shoot LTM lenses, it's just a really, really nice option. And the only smaller downside here is that you don't have a self-timer and a maximum shutter speed of only 1/500th of a second, but even that, for most cases, is completely sufficient. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like it and maybe even share it with your friends. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel. Jules, Greg, and I really appreciate each and every subscriber coming our way. So thanks for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.